to our short series on Texas Senate Bill 8. In this video, we're going to answer the question, how would the Education Savings Account program proposed by Senate Bill 8 actually work? I'm going to be pulling my summary from the text of the bill itself, as well as the bill analysis. So I will link to both of those in the notes on this video and would encourage you to just take a look, read it for yourself, follow along. I'm going to cover what I think is most salient from this portion of the bill, but I will definitely miss some fine details. I will also say before I jump in, thanks so much for bearing with me and even like watching these videos at all. I feel like a viral content creator somewhere on the internet like loses their wings every time I post one of these because my lighting and sound are terrible and I'm talking about this complex stuff with like no visual support for you, way longer than they need to be. But also I'm a working mom and this is not my day job. I am doing these in the dead of night as I have time. So no bells and whistles here. I'm hoping that your sense of civic duty and my magnetic personality will hold you here. But I do appreciate your grace with this. Okay, let's dive in. I'm going to try to give just a summary of the major points in the bill and then a few of my hot takes on it. So if you want to take a look at the text of the bill itself, the Education Savings Account section starts on page 10. So we start things off with a bang by talking about money. The funding for this Education Savings Account program would come out of general revenue. The legislature can appropriate funds specifically for this purpose. And folks can also make grants and donations to the fund. There is a piece later on in the bill that I think that specifically says government can't draw money from the foundation school funds, which is our primary vat of money for funding public schools to finance this program. So can't draw directly from public schools in order to fund the Education Savings Account program. The bill also notes that this program would require the state comptroller's office to contract with an outside organization, one or more outside organizations. They call them certified educational assistance organizations, to actually administer the program day to day. So it's these contractors that would be responsible for like marketing and communications around the program, managing the application, managing the accounts and making sure money goes in and out correctly, vetting, pre-approving vendors, and then like closing accounts for kids who have entered a public school or finished their high school education and aren't eligible for the accounts anymore. So that introduces kind of a new set of players into the process. In terms of who would be eligible, parents could apply for an education savings account under two conditions, or like an option A, option B. Option A is you had a child in public school for at least 90% of the preceding year. So they like were an existing public school student and you're taking them out of the system. And then option B is you have a kiddo who's about to start pre-K or kindergarten and they like qualify to enroll in a public school, but you're deciding to enroll them elsewhere. This bill anticipates that there may be more folks applying for education savings accounts than there's actually funding for. And in that case, the bill says that 2/3 of these slots should be reserved for children zoned for a school that's rated C, D, or F in our state accountability system. And then it holds the other third of slots for children who are zoned for a school that's rated as an A or a B campus. And then other than that, the only provision is just like applications will be processed in the order received. So this is a first come, first served program. So if you do get approved for an account, what do you get? You get $8,000 from the state every year. It doesn't count toward your income for federal income taxes, so it's tax-free dollars. And you get this every year that your child is not enrolled in public school. You can use it for a variety of things. So you can use it for tuition at an accredited private school. They do have to be accredited. And it can also cover things like textbooks, uniforms, transportation, that kind of thing. You can also use the funds in the account to pay for services like tutoring or therapy. So it doesn't necessarily have to be placing your child in like a private school setting. And then anything you don't spend that year rolls over to the next year. and the next and the next and next, and then anything you don't spend by the end of your child's senior year goes back into the state fund from the program for the program. And same thing, like if you decide to re-enroll your child in public school, whatever money you have left like reverts back to the state. So that's who can apply and what they can spend it on. Obviously, there's more detail in the bill if you want to drill down into the fine print, which I encourage you to do. With regards to accountability, there's a couple provisions built in here. One has to do with like financial accountability, and then the other has to do with like outcomes for students. So on the financial side, so I mentioned that the state would have to contract with this like certified educational assistance organization that's actually running the program. They in turn would have to subcontract with an auditor that would conduct random audits of accounts to check to make sure funds are being spent for appropriate expenses, and also to make sure that the folks holding these accounts are still eligible for them. So that's the provision for the like financial oversight. And then on the sort of academic side, the organization or organizations that run this program are required to produce an annual report that tells how many people applied for and received an account, some measure of participant satisfaction with the program, results of any nationally norm reference tests that students happen to take while participating in the program. They have to look at how the program is affecting private and public school capacity and quality, and how much money the program is saving the state, and the extent to which the students who use these accounts are college and career ready within a year of high school graduation. So pretty long list of metrics there for this organization to keep tabs on. And then a couple other provisions that I think are worth mentioning. One is that both the organization running this program and the private school enrolling the student has to provide parents notice that private schools are not required to comply with federal and state laws regarding education for students with disabilities. And then there's also a clause about sort of like the autonomy of the education provider that gets payments through this program. And it basically says nobody can make a rule that would limit the ability of these education providers to teach as they see fit, or and like nobody can make a rule that would require them to sort of like alter or modify the religious or institutional values that they are transmitting to students. So those are the highlights of the bill. Hope that all made sense. So yeah, just a few reflections on what I'm seeing here. One is, I'm a former teacher, so we're going to start off with the positives, right? I appreciate the degree of thought that went into the design of this bill. I can definitely see an effort to address some of the concerns that folks have raised about fairness and accountability and impact on public schools, that type of thing. And like, I don't know, like there's been so much passion about this topic and so much like back and forth and politicking and like media coverage over this. Like it's been quite a spectacle. It's a hot topic, but like when you read the bill itself, it's sort of reassuringly boring and detailed and governmenty, which is really how these things should be, right? Like this is not about signaling your position on an issue. It's about developing a program that needs to be workable and like putting thought into those details. So that's my rambly way of saying, like, I see that they're trying here. Appreciate that. Having said that, I see several red flags here that would keep me from personally wanting to see this bill passed, at least written as is. So one thing I want to highlight is that a third of the spots in this program are supposed to be held for kids who are zoned for a public school that is rated an A or a B. So those are the two top ratings that campuses can get in our public school accountability system. So that means we're potentially using public dollars to send kids somewhere else when, from an academic standpoint, they have a perfectly reasonable free public school option available to them. So I talked about this issue a little bit in my What's the Deal with Vouchers series, but like we want to be careful about getting into the territory of funding wants instead of needs. It's not like super fiscally responsible in my opinion. And so that provision about like you can use these funds even if you have a perfectly good school available to you, not a fan of that. And then on a similar front, I noted that there aren't any other restrictions on eligibility. It's first come, first served. That means there are no like income thresholds that you need to fall below in order to qualify. So that means there's nothing to stop the state from sending $8,000 a year tax-free to families who already have that money available and would have put their child in private school even if they didn't have an education savings account. So it's really just like transferring money or transferring the financial responsibility from the individual to the state when there's really no need to. On the accountability front, those measures are not as strong as I would like to see. So like from a financial perspective, we get these random audits. But like what percentage of the overall pool would be audited? And like, is there actually going to be enough attention on this to make sure that fraud is detected and addressed? Yeah, like I would love to know more information about that, and I don't know if that will be available. But I'm not like super confident in the idea of random audits being enough to make sure that funds are being spent the way they're supposed to be. And then on the academic side for accountability, I love that these organizations have this long laundry list of like things to collect data on and report on. But it's not clear to me that they're going to be able to get that data in any kind of like uniform and consistent way. Like they're having to gather it from private schools and private tutors and families, but like the folks providing the data have like no, as far as I can tell, no obligation to report it and no like system for reporting it. I don't know, like I'm just skeptical that they'll actually get the information they need to give us any kind of like useful report. And even more than that, there's no teeth. Anytime you build an accountability, there needs to be some kind of consequence if the data you're gathering indicates that there's a problem. But in this case, the bill says the annual report needs to be posted online publicly every year. But it doesn't say anything about what happens if a specific provider is shown to be producing poor outcomes for students, or just if the program as a whole is not living up to expectations. I would just say as a sidebar too, like it's kind of hard to know even what the expectations for this program are, because the way this policy is designed, it's not clear like that this policy is just focusing on improving educational outcomes for students. Like again, this is open to students who are zoned for perfectly good schools. It's open to students whose families can provide a private education anyway. So we definitely have some mixed messages here, and this feels, again, and then this like lines up with how it's been sold to the public. This program seems more about allowing parents to place their kids in a setting that aligns with their personal beliefs and preferences, not necessarily with improving academic outcomes for students in struggling schools. So big concern on the accountability front. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on was this like autonomy clause. So the bill's authors want to make it very, very clear that these private education providers can receive public funding without being restricted at all in what or how they teach. This stinks, like as a former educator and just like general supporter of public schools. This feels ironic. This feels unfair to me, given how much our legislature has been working to restrict what's taught in public schools. So, I mean, we've always, or at least for the past couple decades, we've subjected our public schools to a very strict and comprehensive accountability system. We're always messing around with standards and curriculum that changes all the time. And lately, our legislature has been throwing a lot of regulation at public educators about how they talk about US history and race and gender and sexuality. They're like combing through the shelves of public school libraries to weed out offensive titles. There's so much scrutiny. And yet, private education providers would get to have their cake and eat it too under this bill. They could get public dollars, but they could teach whatever and however they wanted. So I would just urge you, like if you're a supporter of this legislation, like just think through that and be careful what you wish for. You know, my impression, and I don't want to overgeneralize, but my impression from the way folks talk about this is like you would be happy for private providers with like a traditional Christian worldview to have complete freedom in their curriculum and methods. You feel comfortable with that. But like, would you feel the same way if the provider taught the values and beliefs and used the methods of like a less mainstream Christian group, or it was affiliated with another world religion, or even like a cult or an extremist group? Or even ironically, like what if there was a private education provider getting funds through this program that taught the same concepts about race and gender that you're afraid of public schools teaching? Um, so all like, and these are all hypotheticals, right? Like I don't know what the actual landscape in Texas is. But if you keep that autonomy clause, you got to be really sure you're actually okay with the full range of possibilities, because you're giving these folks really wide latitude with how they teach kids using public funding. Um, and again, like, let's just stop and reflect on how this compares to how we treat our public educators and our public schools. So bottom line here, if we had to establish education savings accounts, which I don't think we need to, this bill's an okay start, but I don't think it's ready for prime time. I wouldn't want to see this passed as is. And we haven't even talked yet about what it's going to cost. That's the next video. But in the meantime, if anything here has triggered a desire to maybe have a conversation with your elected representatives about this, look them up, get in touch, call their office or write a letter. I'll include a link for you to do that in the notes below. Thanks for listening.